Okay, we're in the Maimer Pada V'Shalom Tafshin Lamed Tes, a couple of lines into chapter 3. So, just get up to speed, and we're trying today trying it without the microphone. Right. So hopefully the audio is okay today. Hopefully people can give us some feedback, and if it is, then we'll have to get a new mic, and if not, we'll have to figure something else out. Okay, so we talked about Pada V'Shalom Nafshi. We quoted the verse that my soul was redeemed in peace, and we said, what does this mean? What is the idea of being redeemed in peace? And our Maimer is based on a Maimer of the Mittler Rebbe with the same title. So that's the Maimer we're going to keep referring back to, is the Maimer of the second Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, whose birthday and yahrzeit is on the 9th of Kislev, which is next Shabbos, and whose day of freedom, of liberation, was on the 10th of Kislev, which is this year is going to be Sunday after Shabbos. Okay, so this idea, he says like this, that this idea of redemption in peace means that the redemption itself takes place in peace. We asked, what does it mean that how do you, if there's peace, then why do you need to be redeemed? Redemption means that there's no peace and you have to be rescued, you have to be redeemed. So what does it mean that there's redemption in peace? We said you can't say, we're not interpreting the pasuk to say that you're redeemed in a time of conflict, you're redeemed, and then afterwards we made peace. Because the pasuk says, Pada V'Shalom, that the redemption itself was in peace. Then we ask from the pasuk itself, it says, Mikravli. David HaMelech says that I was being attacked, I was in a battle, I was engaged in war. So if you're engaged in a battle, if you have an enemy, so then again, it's not peace. So how do these two things go together? Okay, and we said that the idea of, to enhance the question, we said that shalom, when we talk about peace, what's true peace? True peace is when the enemy becomes a friend. Not just, right, because you said we could hold back an enemy, right? We can fight off the enemy and hold him back, but the enemy is still in force, and the animosity, the hatred might still be very strong, but you've been able to withhold the enemy. Like the next one would be shalom. And then you have an enemy that you've defeated, you vanquish your enemy. So the enemy is still an enemy, but you've completely decimated them, right? You've completely overpowered them. But then there is where the enemy becomes a friend. So we said a little bit of that was like by Shlomo HaMelech. The time of Shlomo was a time of peace, but we said the real ultimate fulfillment of this concept is in the time of Mashiach. In the Messianic era, when there will be no unholiness, everything will be transformed, right? So when and our pasuk Pada V'Shalom Nafshi, when we talk about shalom, peace, the ultimate, the truest peace is that ideal of peace, the idea where the enemy becomes transformed into a friend. Mikrav, when we talk about battle and war, so there are different types of war, they're not all the same. The worst kind is hand-to-hand combat, when you're wrestling with the other individual, not a war that's waged from far. Krav, when we refer to war as with the word krav, in Hebrew, krav has the same root as the word kiruv, to be close, meaning that the war is happening close, in very close proximity, and not just close, but when you're wrestling with each other, when you're entangled with each other, with your enemy. So that's a much greater, a much more bitter war. So here we have two extremes. How does that work? We have an extreme, one end, which is krav, that we have a war, and a particularly cruel and harsh and difficult war, which is when the two are entangled with each other. And then you have peace, the ultimate type of peace, which is a total transformation of the enemy into a friend. So we have to understand that. So we started chapter 3, we'll read again from the beginning of chapter 3, but what we started to talk about is that there are two ways to transform your enemy. We talk about the neshama, the soul, and the body, or the animal soul and the godly soul, that seem to be enemies, right? We know the famous vart of the Baal Shem Tov, Kisira Chamer Senacha. When you look at your own materialism, your coarseness, your animal soul, your humanness, so you'll see that it's Senacha. It's your enemy. What does it mean it's your enemy? Your godly soul wants to serve God. Your animal soul wants to live a good life. And that those two are, in a sense, not that they're incompatible. You could serve God and have a good life, and you serve God, obviously, it's tzaddik v'toivlei. But the point is that its interests are elsewhere. That's what it means. That it's a conflict, because the neshama is only interested in God, and the animal soul is only interested in itself. So how does the godly soul, the neshama comes down into the body? What's the purpose of the soul coming to the body? One of the reasons the soul comes to the body is to transform the body, right? To elevate, refine the body, that the body should also be more soul-like, right? To live a more soulful kind of existence, which without the soul you wouldn't be capable of. So how does the soul impact and influence the body? And we say body, we mean really the animal souls. How does that happen? So we said there are two ways. There's a way which is through combat. There's a wrestle that takes place, a struggle, and then there's a way that's a peaceful way. Generally, when we refer to these two ways that the neshama influences the body, we divide them into two types. There's the battle, which is expressed through davening, through prayer, and then there is the peaceful way, which is through Torah study. What's the difference? So we discussed this idea of a court case that takes place, and you have somebody that stands accused of committing a crime. So you have the prosecutor gets up, and the prosecutor lays out his case against the accused, against the defendant, and there's evidence and there's arguments, and it's a very complex, intricately built argument that the prosecutor puts forth. Then you have a defense attorney defending the accused, and the defense attorney has to listen to the arguments of the prosecutor, and he has to try and offer a rebuttal, right? A counter argument, right? To reject the arguments that were set forth by the prosecutor. So that we refer to as a struggle. What does it mean that it's a struggle? There's they're sparring with each other. The defense attorney and the prosecution are both, they're sparring with each other. One has one idea, the other one has another one. There's one evidence, another evidence. It's like a chess match that takes place where they're struggling with each other, and each one is trying to get an angle or an advantage over the other one's arguments that they put forth. That's a struggle. Ultimately, the defense attorney could win and defeat the prosecution, but there's a battle that took place between the two of them. Then you have a situation where, middle of the court case, the king walks in the room. King enters the courtroom. And so, as in the metaphor, this idea is tradition is that the king, we know the concept of Ba'or Pnei Melech Chaim, that in the presence of the king, there's only life. So when the king walks in, instantly what happens? The case is over and the person's exonerated. We put last class in more modern terms the idea of like the ability that a president has to pardon somebody, right? So you can have somebody who goes to court and is accused of a crime, and the person is prosecuted for the crime and found guilty of the crime, and then the person maintains, let's say, his innocence, and so he goes to the Court of Appeals, and he goes through the whole court process till he may end up all the way in the Supreme Court and may eventually be found innocent. But the point is that there's a huge file and claims and arguments that were put forth and evidence that were put forth against him. So he might be able to ultimately come out victorious. He might be able to have it thrown out or dismissed or overturned. But the point is that there's a struggle that takes place, and he has to go through all of that paperwork, right, to get to be set free. But then you have a president with a couple of strokes of his pen, signs his name, and the sentence is the person's pardon. What happens to all the reams of paperwork and all of the... Nothing is out. Well, even though you have a commutation, you have a pardon, the two different things, right? So there's those differences. Actually, the analogy can actually work a little bit more. But I'm saying let's just leave it as one thing for now. Point is that there's what's the difference between the two? So the difference is like this: when a defense attorney is arguing with a prosecuting attorney, he has to listen to his arguments, and then he has to counter those arguments, right? What happens? The two of them are now entangled with each other. And ultimately, as much as the defense attorney would argue against the prosecution, as much as he'll maintain adamantly his client's innocence, ultimately there are arguments that are being made and put forth against his client. The accused stands accused with arguments against him. And those arguments are valid, real arguments. You have to do some maneuvering and some great arguing to be able to counter them and to be able to rise above them. But the point is, his arguments are real arguments. The defense attorney, who might feel that his client is innocent, still has to listen and entertain the possibility that his client is actually guilty. because you have to listen to what the prosecution is saying. In order to be able to defend your client, in order to be able to counter those arguments, you need to be able to listen and at that moment entertain the idea that the client might be guilty and then figure out how to counter it. So that is war, right? What happens afterwards? What does that mean? That we call that a mulchama, a sparring between the two. And what happens afterwards? You end up with let's say the defense wins, is victorious, right? But that win is like a hard-fought battle where that win comes, as the result of that fight. But then you have the king walks in. What happens when the king walks in? The king doesn't listen to any arguments. He just shows up. He shows up, and whatever the arguments are irrelevant. Suddenly the person's set free. He's exonerated. Not that he's found innocent of any of the claims against him. We're not even discussing them. He's just set free, just like that, right? So something that goes just above and beyond the whole process. It's just right over the top of the process. So here, what happened? Two things. Number one, the king doesn't get entangled in the arguments. Yes or no? Is he guilty? Is he innocent? This argument and this evidence and that. None of that is. The king doesn't lower himself, as it were, into that. It doesn't get engaged and entangled in that discussion. That's one thing that happens. The other thing that happens is, as a result of the king coming in, the person's completely free, without any argument, without any dragged out court case, right? So that's what he says. He's going to say in the beginning here, the Maimer in chapter 3. That there's birur b'derech milchama. There's a refining that happens through battle, through war. The neshama comes into the body, and the neshama has to listen to the body and understand what it wants, its desires, and then try and convince it that it should want other desires. In the process, the neshama is suddenly now open to a world that's totally foreign to it, a much lower world, a world of self-interest. The neshama constantly maintains its position, doesn't get pulled down into it, but still has to lower itself, in a sense, into that argument, into the gutter, to be able to overcome. And through arguing and making its case, the neshama could hopefully bring the animal soul around to its side as well. But then you have b'derech menucha v'shalem. Menucha means with ease, right, in comfort, and shalom is with peace. What's menucha and shalom? These are two aspects of what happens in the analogy with the king coming in. The neshama can influence the animal soul with menucha. What that means is that the neshama is influencing it without engaging it. That's why it's with ease, because it doesn't engage it. It doesn't get into the arguments. It doesn't go tit for tat on the arguments. Like the king who comes in doesn't engage the prosecution. He just shows up. He walks in the door and the whole thing's over. So that's with ease. And also, that's as far as who's the one that's doing it. So the impact that the neshama has when it's in that version, in that type of transformation of the animal soul, that's menucha. But also, what happens as a result of it? It's not that you're found innocent through war, but it's through peace. Right? There's no battle, there's no engaging, and there's no sparring, and so therefore also the influence is a peaceful influence. The transformation of the animal soul happens in a peaceful way. Generally, these two methods of influencing the animal soul are davening and learning. When you daven, what happens? You start thinking about, you have to start dealing with your own internal struggle, and you have to start to set forth arguments to convince your animal soul to love God. You're trying to get to loving God. So what do? You sit down with your siddur, and you start davening. You go page by page, and every page is davening is like a carefully designed ladder that takes you from step A to step B to step C. One thought, one idea that you have to convince your animals on. What do we do? Most of davening we're spending thinking about God as He's within creation, right? God is the creator. We look in creation. So what we're trying to do is the animal soul looks at this wonderful world and sees all the pleasures in this world and says, I want all of this pleasure for myself. Says the godly soul, let's shift your focus. You're from this world, you see the here and now, the present. Well, look at those things and let's look deeper into those things and see their true nature, which is godliness. And that's how the godly soul slowly tries to influence the animal soul. But all with engaging it within its own framework, within its own world. That's why that's called mulchama, a sparring that takes place between the two. Right? Where the godly soul has to understand what the animal soul is into, what its interests are, and on that level engage it and try to influence it. That's not menucha and shalom. That's why the Zohar says that davening is shas tzloisa, is shas krava. That the time of davening, tzloisa, time of davening is a time of battle, of war, because you're wrestling with your animal soul. with your natural human instincts and impulses. But then you have that learning. What happens when you learn? When you learn, your mind is now absorbed and occupied in God's wisdom. And so it's not engaged in the physical world. Its focus is on God. So here, when a person's studying Torah, what happens? You transform your mind from being one that has petty, foolish thoughts to being one that's occupied and focused on godly thoughts, trying to understand God. And as a result, what happens? The transformation that happens, the influence, the change of perspective, of worldview that now occurs within the person is a peaceful transformation. Because you're not engaging. It's not like we're going to set forth one argument, then we're going to say, no, the world says one thing, God says the other thing. This is one thing, this is a counter argument. You're just focused on God's wisdom. And therefore, that becomes that's a peaceful sort of influence that you have. Where by immersing yourself in Torah, what happens is you transform your own intellect. Your own mind starts to think along those terms, in that way, starts to have that perspective, and that happens in a pleasant way, in a b'derech menucha. It happens in pleasantness, and the result is peace. That it's a peaceful transformation. Okay, that's generally how we look at Torah and Tefillah and the different ways that davening and learning influence us and transform us. So, davening is a struggle to transfer to bring about transformation, and learning is a peaceful transformation. Okay. In the Maimer of the Mittel Rebbe that our Maimer is based on, the Mittel Rebbe says that these two modes of transformation actually are both found in davening as well. So this is not something that's discussed in many places. So this is generally divided to davening and learning, but here in this Maimer, and that's what the Rebbe is going to talk about, how that we can find both of these modalities within davening itself. So let's take it from the top of chapter 3. So if we can understand, to address our questions at the beginning about the verse Pada V'Shalom. How is there peace? And if there's peace, why do I need to be redeemed? How is it peace, which is that there's no enemy, the enemy is a friend? If we're talking about mikravli, that I'm coming from a battle, and the worst kind of a battle, how do we work this out? So he says like this. Mittel Rebbe explains in his Maimer, these two ideas of war and peace, we can find both of these modalities in davening. Then the Rebbe notes that the lahoyer, the bekam mekaymis mavur, in many places it's explained shahabir the tefillah b'derech milchama, that the transformation of that happens through davening is one of battle. Like the Zohar says, shas tzleisa, shas krava, the time of davening is a time of battle, and that va'abir b'derech menucha shalom, the transformation happens through menucha and shalom. Now, based on the introduction, we can understand why the Rebbe says menucha shalom. They're two different aspects, right? Depends what we're talking about. Menucha is the method in which you influence it, right? And shalom is the type of transformation that occurs, one of peace, right? So that happens through the study of Torah. And the Rebbe says in note 23, in this Maimer itself of the Mittel Rebbe, where he says Inyan Shalom, where he's talking about peace, and he says that happens through Torah. So even in this Maimer, the Mittel Rebbe talks about this idea. But in this Maimer, the Pada B'Shalom of the Mittel Rebbe that's in Shari Tshuva, he explains that even in davening we find these two modalities, the idea of battle, transformation through battle, and transformation through peace. And he said, where do we see it in davening? So he says, Ha'ava, the love of B'chol Levavcha, the love that is expressed in the Krishma, in the Hafta, where we say to love Hashem with all our heart, that is Mitzad B'chinas Naran, that is because that love comes from the levels of Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama of the soul. That even though, notwithstanding the fact that this love affects the animal soul, when we say b'chol levavcha is b'shnei yitzracha, Chazal say, right? What's levavcha? The word doesn't say b'chol libcha, with all your heart, but levavcha almost implies like your two hearts. What are your two hearts? So Chazal say your two hearts means your two inclinations, your good inclination, your evil inclination, right? Both of them love God. So we see there's a transformation, and what's what happens? Love. But nevertheless, it's mikol makom mikivan she'avad b'chol levavcha mitzad avon v'asaga shalikus u'toiv. What does it mean how is it that my evil inclination should love God? How does that happen? It happens through explaining to it that God is good. So I want my evil inclination wants what's good. By explaining to it that God is good, so now it wants God. Since intellect is an internal function, meaning that it is enclosed in the thing that it influences, so we can understand that the influence the nefesh elikis, the godly soul, has on the animal soul, that the animal soul should also love God, is through enclothing itself within the animal soul. What does that mean? So in davening we say like this. We say in the Shema, we say in V'ahavta, we say that you should love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. 3 things: all your heart, all your soul, all your might. So the Rebbe is going to explain that all your heart we'll take a step back. We have 3 loves, right? Love with all your heart, love with all your soul, love with all your might. Remember, in the last Maimer actually we learned about Noach's Teva, in the Maimer Lach Lecha, we learned Tachtim, Shnim, Shlishim, the bottom level, the second level, and the top level. And we learned that corresponds to the 5 levels of the soul. Right? So what are the 5 levels of the soul? Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida. And we said Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama are what are enclosed within the soul, within the body. Chai and Yechida are aspects, levels of the soul that aren't enclosed in the body, that remain outside of the body. Right? And we said, even though we have 5 levels of our soul, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida, nevertheless, we can divide them into 3. There's Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. Those are the 3 levels that are that come into the body. That's one category. That's one level. Then you have Chaya as a separate category. Yechid is a third category. Right? What does that mean? So Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, we know that we have 10 faculties. Right? We have 3 intellectual faculties and then 7 emotional faculties. So you have Chabad, your intellectual faculties. You have Chagas, your primary emotional faculties, love and fear and compassion, love and awe and compassion. And then you have Nehi, Netzach, Chod Yesod, which is sort of an external expression of those primary emotions of love, fear, and God. But we're not going to get into the 10 attributes. That's not today's topic. But the point is that you have these 10 attributes can be divided into 3 categories. 3 intellectual, and then within the emotions you have Chabad and you have Chagas. I'm sorry, you have Chagas and you have Nehi. So it's explained that Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, these 3 levels of the soul, correspond to these 3 aspects of the 10 attributes. Now, what does it mean that you have 10 attributes, 10 faculties of your soul? Those faculties are called Panemius. They're called Panemi. They're internalized faculties. What does that mean? They make up our conscious selves. Right? So they have a specific definition of what they are, and that's something that's internal within ourselves. Right? So we know our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings, that's all internal. So Nefesh, the lowest level of the soul, that corresponds to the lowest level of the emotions, Nehi. Ruach, the second level of the soul, that corresponds to Chagas, to the primary emotions. And then Neshama, that corresponds to the intellect, to Chabad. So all 3 are internal. They correspond to these aspects of the attribute, the faculties, the capacities of our neshama, of our koiches pnimim. Why are they called koiches pnimim? Because they're internal, meaning they're defined and relatable, and they function in a very specific, defined way. But then you also have your will. Your will transcends all of it, right? Like the way we always say, there's a will, there's a way. What does it mean that there's a will, there's a way? Your will overpowers all of it. Your will is already not something that is internal, in the sense that your intellect, where's your intellect? It's in your mind. Where are your emotions? It's in the heart, right? The nehi, the perseverance of the emotions, that's in our extremities. Our arms, our legs, that's what carries those emotions out. That's how our emotions find external expression. There's a specific place in the body for all that. But where's your will? Where do you desire? A real desire, something that you have a real desire for, you feel it everywhere. You feel it everywhere equally. Because your desire is more of a transcendent capacity. It doesn't have a specific place within the body. Desire, in Kabbalistic terminology, desire is referred to as keser. Keser is what? The crown. The crown goes above the head. So Chabad is in the head. That's the mind. The crown, keser, is above. That's a transcendent aspect.
So it's not considered pnimi because you also feel it b'chitzenis?
The idea is that it overwhelms the system. It's not confined and limited to any particular part. It's an overwhelming, all-encompassing experience. And then you have the essence of the neshama that's beyond even that. Now, let's bring in another element here, another aspect, which is there's the concept of food. Right? We're familiar with the concept of food. Food is referred to as pinini, as internalized. Why? Because when we eat food, we actually ingest it into our bodies, and the food becomes part of our bodies, and is broken down, dissected, and in the body. Then you have clothing. Clothing are tailored to your body. Your clothes make the man, right? So clothes, but they're outside your body. Clothing don't enter your body. They don't affect you from within. They affect you from the outside. So that represent a higher level, a transcendent level, one that's too high to be inside of you, to be internalized. It's external. But clothing are tailored to the body. So even though they're outside the body, but they're still tailored to the body. Like the analogy we gave of Kesser, the crown sits on top of the head, but it's fitted to the head. That's the fit on your head. And then you have bias, a house. A house also protects a person, impacts a person, and influences a person, but the house is not tailored to a person. You don't have a house that fits you. The house is beyond. Well, you decorate the house and you design it to tailor to your taste, etc. But that's already secondary to the actual house. For clothing to be effective, they have to fit you. You can't put on something that's too small on you. And you can't wear something that's too big on you. If you're going to constantly be tripping over your clothing, they're not going to protect you, they're going to harm you. So we see that you have one aspect is the internalization, things that are internalized like food. Then you have something that's external, that's transcendent, but one that is still connected to your experience, tailored to who you are. And then you have a transcendent level that's totally beyond it. Okay. Similarly, when we talk about the 5 levels of the neshama, we have naran, the 3 internalized aspects of the soul. Those are internal, and those are uniquely you, in a sense, right? As you're definable and knowable. Then you have chaya, which is a transcendent level of the neshama. It doesn't come into the body; that remains above the body, but it's still connected to the body. It's still confined, has some kind of a definition. And then you have yechida that's beyond any definition. If you remember what we learned in the last mimer, we talked about this, and we're going to get into some of that material again now. What does that mean that chaya still has that definition? Is still relatable to the body. It means that when we talk about our will has a definition. It's defined. I know what it is that I want. So since it's definable, right? So that means it's in some way limited. And so it's connected to our finite selves. Does that make sense? And so on one end it's transcendent, but it's limited in the fact that it's transcendent. It's got its definition, its parameters of what it is. It's a will, it's a desire for X, Y, or Z. But then you have Yechidah that defies any definition. It's beyond any definition, any categorization, any kind of... So that's a whole different level. So the Rebbe is going to say in the Maimer here is that when we talk about the love of B'chal Levavcha, that's your heart, that's internal. That corresponds to Naran, the internal part of the Neshama. B'chal Nafshecha, with all your soul, that already corresponds to Chaya. We'll get to soon. And then you have B'chol Maidecha, with all your might, that corresponds to Yechidah. Okay? And the impact of these 3 types of love is similar to these 2 things of impact and transformation through peace and impact and transformation through war. And we started reading here, we didn't explain this idea of B'chol Levavcha, why that's an internalized one, but we'll have to come revisit that in Mitzvah Shem in the next class.